Hey, what's going on? This is your boy Nathan Crankfield, and want to give a quick intro to today's episode. This is from the podcast Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis with my boys over there. We got into some hot takes on Catholic dating. This is my second time on their podcast, and they were gracious enough to let me post it on our channel as well. And so very excited to share this episode with you today. Rigel and I get into some wonderful different topics on how society, how the church, how the world view men versus women, some of the issues we see in Catholic dating, amongst other things. And so I'm excited to share this episode with you. If you haven't checked out their podcast before, you can find it on Apple, Spotify, you can find it on YouTube. They have some really awesome content they're putting out. Great guys. They're great to follow as well on LinkedIn and on Instagram. And so be sure to check out their podcasts. And I hope you have a blessed Advent season. If you haven't checked out the podcast episode earlier this week, just on Apple and Spotify, because it's audio only, we have a recording from a recent parish mission that I did on the topic of hope, which is super relevant for this Advent season. And so be sure to check that out as well. All right, without any further ado, let's get into today's episode from Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis on hot takes in Catholic dating.
Welcome back, dear friends, to another episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. We're seeing an ever-widening political gap between young men and young women. And I can't think of anyone better to talk us through this than Nathan Crankfield. Welcome back to the show, Nathan.
Thanks, my man. It's great to be here. I appreciate you having me back.
No, we love having you on.
Spend time with, one of my two favorite Canadians. So it's always always a pleasure to be here.
Well, first things first, congratulations on the new baby and the move and everything. I'm sure that was it's been a trying time.
Thank you. Yeah, 2025 has definitely been a very full year for us. We, as you mentioned, we've had a kid, we've moved, got promoted. We're going to be moving again here soon, sold a house, bought a house. And so it's been hectic. We've had multiple family trips and just really crazy, but a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun, and we're excited to get settled and to be in this house, hopefully for the next 5 to 10 years. But I'd be lying if I said we're not a little tired every now and then.
100%. I've moved a lot in my life, and it never gets easier. It doesn't matter what the distance is. It's always the same.
No, moving's hard, man. It's tough to, just kind of the upheaval. It's one thing across town. I think it's been another thing in my experience when you're moving across states and kind of these big distances, because it's just also the emotional drain of all of it. It's obviously just more difficult to move 600 miles than 6 miles, but even just, thinking about, okay, we got to now go through the emotional work of making new friends and being in a new place and learning, right? How do I get to the grocery store? How do I get to the gym? What gym am I going to go to? Doing that research, trying to find a new office. So that's
finding a barber that can get your haircut right.
Exactly. Yeah, I got here, dude. Got a haircut. We're in Atchison, Kansas before we moved to Kansas City, Missouri. And got my first haircut. And I knew, because we lived here briefly before. Yeah. And I knew that most of the barbers in town jacked me up. But I had a speaking engagement coming up, and I go get my haircut, and the dude just is pushing my hairline back and doing all these things I specifically asked him not to do, because I knew that he was going to be tempted to do it. And it's tough. The worst is when you have to go speak or something, right? If I was just working behind the camera and at home, it's one thing, but it's just tough to be on the road and you're trying to look your best, and you're I hate my haircut. Yeah, I had to really try to force it out of my mind. It was hard.
Yeah,
but it's a lot.
It's those hidden realities that we take for granted sometimes.
100%. Yeah. You get settled into your everyday life, and that's kind of the benefit of staying in the same place. But there's a lot of fun stuff too. I think it's fun finding new parishes, new gyms. I actually enjoy kind of the shaking it up. And so that's the back and forth, the trade-off for me. I actually enjoy that probably more than most people. So I'm excited to be in a new place, and we're very excited that it costs, substantially less. And so
and that makes a huge difference for us, especially, considering our last episode we recorded was talking about men as provider.
Yep.
If you're living in a place that's high cost of living, it just makes that pressure all the more tense, right?
Yes, it makes it much more difficult to do it. And so having these few months here at a house owned by my in-laws where I don't have to pay rent or mortgage has been just absolutely incredible. We just get paid on the first, and then you just get to keep it, for the next week or whatever, looking at it and just being all right, when's this huge chunk going to be deducted? But not having that has been so nice. And we just bought a house for, I think it was 35% less, 40% less than the house that we just sold in Denver, and so it's nicer and bigger and all these things. So we're stoked.
That's amazing
to get to move in. Yeah,
I'm happy for you guys.
Thank you.
Well, we're here to talk about this widening gap that we're seeing. I think potentially this last election for you guys in the U.S. has really demonstrated it, but we've just been seeing it for a while. There's a growing political gap between young men who are leaning more conservative and young women who are leaning much more liberal. First of all, why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there's a lot to it for sure. Feminism most definitely has played a huge role in it over the last 100 years
Hmm.
of really intentionally targeting women and convincing them that all conservative values are bad, that they're
Yeah.
being oppressed, that family values are bad for them, that they need to fight for just utter independence, not just
Hmm.
independence, obviously, in freedom and equal rights and things that most rational people, the church would support and encourage, but going beyond that to say like you need to have the right to, abortion up through all of 9 months, and we need to break down gender constructs and gender as a whole for society, and not make it this kind of rigid thing that you have to be a man or a woman, and all these different things that it's kind of folded down into because they said this is what's best for you, this is what's best for women. And I
Hmm.
think that's where you start to see they go so far, right? It's like all these things are almost like a circle. And I think women are just kind of at the farther end of the circle where men have gone almost like a lot of men, I think, have gone fully around the circle. Because
Yeah.
if you think about it, one of the things that's interesting when you talk about like the fight for abortion rights, quote unquote rights, and women's health care, and folding abortion up underneath that is
Hmm.
that men were the ones that like passed those laws. Like you look
Yeah.
at the Supreme Court and the state courts at the time that were passing all these feminist laws, it was men who were doing it.
Hmm.
And so I think that men quickly realized as we kind of go around this circle or the pendulum swing that, okay, this is really not great for us. Like
Hmm.
this is really, this toxic masculinity, believe all women is putting innocent men in jail because we have forgotten the fact that women can lie too. And so I
Hmm.
think men really rejected it and swung back a little bit harder. And they never swung quite as far as I think a lot of women did. But I think that the pendulum for women, they're seeing like and believing and being told they're like, hey, these things are what's best for you. Now I
Hmm.
think where this pendulum is starting to swing because they did have this improved quality of life, or so it seemed at least for a long time. They were making more money, getting
Yeah.
better education. They were advancing in society, more powerful positions, prime ministers, all these different vice presidents of the United States. You're seeing it all over the place. I think what's interesting to see within like the feminist breakdown is then you have what they call the TERFs, right?
Hmm.
The trans exclusionary radical feminists, where
Yeah.
this why I call it a circle is we kind of come around this point now where actually we're being so progressive that this is harming actual women.
Hmm.
Right, we're allowing men to compete in women's sports. Like before, you were saying that this was going to like advance women, but now those of us who are not just cogs in the machine can at least step back and say, "Oh, Leah Thomas winning the national swimming competition in college, the national championship, like that actually took opportunities away from women."
Yeah.
And they say, "Well, no, you're just saying that she is a woman. Like Leah Thomas is a woman, so you're actually just you're trans, yeah, exclusionary or whatever." So it's
Hmm.
interesting to see that. So I do think the tide is turning a little bit for a lot of women. Now, there's obviously a lot of conservative women out there as well, but I do think that you're going to see there's kind of like a breaking point for a lot of people where they're actually coming to this fork in the road that they didn't have to face before, where it's like,
Yeah.
how much are you willing to reject reality? And I think you're seeing that. I know we're seeing that in the United States, obviously, with recent events with like the murder of Charlie Kirk and different things where
Absolutely.
as things get more extreme, you have to be like, okay, are you willing to stay on the boat? Because they're just going more and more and more extreme. So it's like,
Yeah.
at what point are you willing to draw the line? And you get to see
Exactly.
people, I think, who are honest, like Bill Maher, Joe Rogan, a lot of these people who are seen as just kind of like classical Democrats, classical liberals that are like, wait a minute, this is too much. This
Yeah.
is too far. Why are you
Yeah.
doing this?
I
And
mean, even
it's
Elon
interesting.
is chief among them, right? Like, because
Yes.
he used to
Yep.
be Democrat, but I keep seeing this graphic pop up. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's I think even Marshallino posted it recently, and it was how it's not that men are actually becoming, or even generally conservative people are becoming more conservative. It's that even centrists who were leaning more liberal before are just conservative now just by staying centrist because liberals
It
have
just
gone
keeps going
so
so
far.
far.
Yeah, exactly.
He also posted
Um,
this great thing. I don't know if you saw. It was kind of this like constellation of beliefs on the left and the right, and it was a
yes,
really
yeah, I
beautiful
did.
illustration. Yeah, of just
Yeah.
how on the left there's this really tight circle because you don't have. It really is so dogmatic, which is funny
Hmm.
because it's the exact thing, and this happens a lot, where the exact thing they accuse us of is what they're actually doing.
Yeah.
And so that's how they are. Where on the left side of things, and mind you, I'm somebody, and I'm happy to get into this. Like I registered as a Democrat at 18 years
Hmm.
old, And so I
Yeah.
always try to highlight that for people. It's like, I'm black and white. I was a Democrat that became Republican. I was a Protestant that became Catholic. Like, I really do try to see things from both sides and understand things, and have been on both sides.
Yeah.
But this like tight knit thing where, yeah, again, you can't be on the left. J.K. Rowling is a great example of this. Like, not
Yes.
conservative
Yeah.
by any standard, but she's like, hey, we can't let biological men beat up biological women in a boxing ring. And they're
Yeah.
like, oh, you hate trans people and you're transphobic. And she's like, I don't. I
Yeah.
just think that we have to like have some reasonable regulations around this. And they're like, no, you're hard right, far right, and all these different things. And that's how it goes. And it's a really interesting way to lose a party and to lose elections and to lose all of the ground you've gained in society. So that's why I think it is just this kind of full circle that's going to just return back. Hopefully, I think we're heading in that direction. We're just going to return back to some normalcy. There's going to be a lot of pain to get there, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting time.
Yeah,
It's
for
without
sure.
a doubt.
And one thing we have to be really careful of as Catholics, I think, is not to confuse our faith with anything political leaning, right? Like,
Right.
because they're two separate issues. It just seems to be now that it's impossible to support any kind of liberal party just because of the policies that they promote. And that is relevant, because the policies will shape society, but our faith is independent of politics. And so, we still have a responsibility to vote and everything. How do you think, Catholic men should be looking at this growing divide, and like, what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I think one thing that's important, especially if we're talking, it maybe makes a little bit difference if we're talking to single Catholic guys or married Catholic guys in regards to that, divide between men and women. But I think for the single guys out there, you obviously want to marry somebody who, I think it's always good to keep openness to people changing, but there's a clear delineation, I think, between people who are open-minded and people who are not.
Yes.
And so I think that it's an objectively bad decision for any Catholic man who takes his faith and the morality that the church teaches seriously to marry somebody that's in that kind of dogmatic leftist. It's kind of what Charlie Kirk had a great description and way of categorizing somebody from being a leftist or being a liberal. And he would describe it as a liberal as somebody who we can, and I have liberal friends, so like many of them, who it's like we can disagree, we can discuss a topic, we can say like, oh, this what Donald Trump did here, or how he's behaving is in bad taste, or it's not good, but he has done some things right. I think this is like a Stephen A. Smith or even a Bill Maher, again, to use him again, where they're willing to actually criticize the Democratic Party at times. Where if you have somebody who's just an absolute leftist, they like can't. You would have to, if you're an actual practicing Catholic, actively hide some of your beliefs.
Yes.
Or else they're going to call you a bigot. They're going to unfriend you. They don't want to be around you. Like, you definitely don't want to get into a situation in dating where that's what you're going to do. Just for the general young Catholic man, I think that it's important that we are just cultivating virtue. And virtue, I think, allows you, when you're navigating this difficult kind of political time, to be discerning, right? Because you have the cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. It allows you to maintain through temperance your anger, so that we're not just, being bullying people and being nasty and unchristlike in the way that we convey our truth, and the truth, not our truth, the truth in our messaging. But it also gives you prudence to discern when and where to do that. Yeah. And then it gives you fortitude as well to say, okay, I know when I need to speak up. I'm not going to not speak up because I'm afraid to. Yeah. I think that's the place as a young Catholic man when you're trying to present the gospel and promote truth and goodness in the world is I try to be discerning, and when I do it, I can't jump into every comment section. I don't need to have every argument in person when somebody makes some offhand comment about something, right? Like there's just times where if I'm at a party of my wife's family, I don't need to get in an argument with her aunts about every single topic that might come up. Yeah. But I want to make sure that I'm not avoiding it because of fear, which is what a lot of people are doing, which is, I think, where you can get into cowardice, which is sinful. And so that I think is important.
That's actually a good question, is like, how do you discern that properly? Because like, I think you've posted before about, just reminding Catholics that Jesus has flipped tables in the temple before, right? Like, it's not just always about turning the other cheek. We have to know the right moments to stand up and actually fight for what's right. Like, how do we properly discern that? And and even beyond that, like, how do we discern how we go about doing it?
Yeah. it's a really good question. And it's difficult to navigate. And I would say giving yourself leeway to recognize you're not going to be perfect with it. One thing that's true with all virtues is I've always loved the kind of example of like a pole or something that gets bent in a certain direction. The way that you fix something that's kind of pretty heavily bent, or, you know, if you have like a piece of paper or especially if you like cardboard or something, right? And it kind of like gets curved or jammed into, you know, your backpack and it's kind of bent in a certain direction. What you do is you bend it back the other way, right? To try to get it back to its kind of neutral position. That's the same thing with virtue, where virtue is in the mean, virtue is in the middle, and you have vices on both sides. And so you have either a deficiency in the virtue or an excess amount of it. Courage is a good example of this, where you have rashness, where you're like too decisive, too getting after it, right? You jump out of the airplane before you've checked your parachute. And then fear and cowardice is on the other side of that, where you're too afraid to jump out of the airplane. Courage is in the middle, where you take the necessary precautions and checks. I say this as, you know, former airborne guy in the Army. So like, I know the precautions and checks that you go through to make it as safe as possible to jump out of an airplane. Yeah. And then you execute and you do it. And so I think that's something that a lot of people have to realize is, which side do I err on? I think it's more common for men than it is for women to err on the side of rashness, where you're just kind of like constantly going, constantly sending it, constantly fighting with everybody. This was me certainly when I was younger. And then you have the other side where you're a little bit more tepid. So if you know which side you err on already, then you can say, I'm going to try to be a little bit more on the other side, right? Try to get to 60% of the other side, and you'll likely end up in the middle. I think that's always a good kind of way to know where you're at. Now, another thing, when you're just kind of discerning situation to situation, you have to be prayerful. I think if you're not praying, then you can't expect to have good discernment in any moment. And so that could be a decision that you're making for your life. It could be a conversation in how I'm speaking to my wife, or how I'm going to correct and discipline my child. There's all these different situations in life where if I'm not actively praying, if I don't have a prayer life, I'm not striving to live in a state of grace, I'm just not going to hear the voice of God as clearly and the movements of the Holy Spirit and be able to discern that. And so that's the first step. That's way before I'm even getting into, should I argue or have this moment? And then I think once you have that, you start to understand and hear the voice of God. You start to recognize where there's times where it's like, I should say something. You have this kind of like itchy, I kind of call it like an itchiness in your heart or in your mind, where you feel really compelled to do or say something. And a lot of people say, well, what would they say? Or what will my wife think? Or is she going to be upset? Or is this person going to be mad at me? And those things tend to come from the devil. So when you have that kind of inclination, or this prompt to do it, and you feel yourself in a good place to do it, that's when I think you should go ahead and execute it, which kind of talks about your last point there, which is, how do you do it in the right way? St. Jose Maria Escriva has this great book called The Way, where he has all these little like quips and one-liners and things that are great for us to pray with. And one of the things in there that I've always held on to is, he says, I made a pact with my tongue to never speak when my heart is troubled. And so that's one thing for me. I know when I'm in the comment section, or you know, in real life, if I feel not the itchiness in my heart, but actually like a temperature rising, like a heat, like a hotness, like I'm angry, then it's like, okay, maybe this isn't the best place for me to go. And I need to give it some time. And I'll come back to this comment or this message or whatever it is and try to respond once I've had some time to let myself come down. And so there's times where I'll be posting, going back and forth with people, and then I'll just like ghost for 2 days and try to come back to it, because that's the time that I needed to kind of return back and not respond in an un-Christ-like manner. And so responding and acting Christ-like in today's world, it is important, as you mentioned, to have both the lion and the lamb, to have both sides of that, to say, I'm going to be loving and see this person as giving them the benefit of the doubt, to say they were probably taught these things when they were at a young, impressionable age, to not just assume they're evil because of these beliefs or the statements that they're making, but also to be corrective and to not have this soft kind of, oh, well, I just personally think that, like, you know, killing babies is wrong, or I just personally think that, you know, my recent battle on LinkedIn, I just personally think that children are more valuable than dogs. It's like, no, that's not how I should say that. That's not that would be unjust. That would be untrue for me to say that that's like my personal belief. It's an objective reality that kids have more value than dogs and cats. And so I should say it that way. And I can still say it kindly, but we have to get out of this constant fear and this political correctness where we can't say what's right and what's wrong, what's better and what's best, and what's the least good option that we have. So
something that's really interesting about that part specifically as well, about how women are just they're not as willing to have kids in general, but they're also, if they do have kids, they're having kids much later in life. I don't know if you noticed this, but my wife and I just had our baby last October. She's almost a year old now. And I don't know, before we had her, my wife was all like, super career driven. She's like, I want to do this and achieve this. And then like, as soon as the baby comes, like this hyper feminine, like maternal side of her just like appeared. And it's been like wonderful to see. But that wouldn't have been, I guess, triggered by anything other than us actually having a baby. So, I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I feel like a lot of women would see, like, it's difficult for them to see the benefit of having a baby until they actually have one, Do you have any thoughts around that, and like how, maybe women who are wrestling with like professional ambition versus having a family life come to this reconciliation of like family life is the thing that's the most important?
Yes. I don't know that Satan's ever taken strength finders, but if he did, I would have to imagine the strategy would be in this top 5. I think it's something that he is very, very good at. And this is a great example of that. I think too many people we tend to be very at the bottom of the funnel. We talk about like this things like the slippery slope. Like we're usually fighting down at the bottom. Like Satan is so intentional about being at that top of just going like, how far back can I get? Oh yeah, having children triggers this innate more like feminine clinging to your husband, bringing the family together. It's just so good, and just creates this maternal instinct in women that I've been working against for so long. How can I fight against that? Well, let's make them hate marriage. Let's, make abortion legal through all 9 months, say that they need it if they're going to advance in their career and have independence from men who are evil and oppressing them. Like it's all very intentional. I've gotten to the point in witnessing this in people that like when I'm interviewing, when I was interviewing recently for Seeking Excellence, this is not for Hallow, but when I'm interviewing for Seeking Excellence, I'm talking to a lot of young women who applied for the job, and several of them that were my finalists were all engaged. And I was just talking to them about like, where do you see yourself over the next 5 years? And just explaining to them that I'm like, you are totally free, in a year and a half or whatever, when you have a child. Like, I'm not going to hold you to what you say today, because I just truly believe that you just don't know what you want until you have the baby in arms.
Yeah.
And I've seen it, just like you're talking about, in some extreme cases of women who went to, Ivy League schools or Notre Dame, or like really like were crushing it in their career, that they have a child, or especially the second one's born. They're like, I'm missing too much. Like, I don't want to do this. Either I want to step back and work a little bit and pull back, or want to totally leave my job, or whatever it is. But many friends and people who have been surprising. And there's women who haven't done that. And that's okay too. I think that we can have room for that. And I don't, I'm not going to not be your friend because your wife wants to work or whatever it is. But I think it's amazing to me how much more common that is than I anticipated or expected, because I grew up in a world where almost all of my friends' parents worked, almost all my friends' moms worked. There's a couple that had stay-at-home moms, but it was very rare, and it was not the common thing. And so I always thought that I'd have a working wife for my entire life when I was dating in high school and college. And
same here.
Met my wife, who she was on this boat way before. Like, she was like, I knew when I was in high school, this is what I want to do. I want to be a full-time mom. So it's been funny, kind of seeing that and navigating that within marriage. But it's definitely a thing. But I just think the devil is really good, man, at just being like, well, if I can just like push you till later, and then you feel more important at your job, because it's easy. Like, a lot of these women, if you're under 25 and you have a child, and that instinct kicks in, they leave their job immediately.
100%.
There's no way that, they're working. Like, my wife was like a youth ministry specialist at the Archdiocese. Like, she was not, she's making $50K a year. It's not like this huge thing. And they can get you to wait the devil can get you to wait till you're 30, 32, and you're, a director somewhere. You're important. It's soaking your ego. You're making a lot of money. That's when it's hard to leave and to be like, I'm going to focus more on my family and be open to having more children.
Yeah.
But we can get you if you get married young and you have kids at 23, 24, it's like, oh, well, what am I doing here? I'm at some entry-level job. They don't need me. They're going to replace me in half a second. And I can go about this and have as many kids as I want, because this is the most fulfilling thing I've ever done. So I think it's important. That's an important strategy that the devil has really implemented and been successful with.
For sure. And I guess the same goes for men as well. And this is something that I definitely wanted to discuss is even with men leaning a little bit more conservative, the things that they're exposed to are the things that they see. And like, let's acknowledge the fact that, for a long time now, men have been told that they're worthless, their masculinity is toxic, and like there's this burden that they carry which just goes unacknowledged. There's an epidemic of loneliness. Acknowledging all that, there are like corners of the internet where men will go to like seek some kind of consolation, and they will find the things that maybe they relate to a little bit more, and those kind of things can be coming from a variety of sources, right? So God willing, the best option for them is that they find a Catholic influencer or something, and they just dive deep into the faith and God's design for men and masculinity. But you can also go this other route where you're finding characters like an Andrew Tate or like a Nick Fuentes, who are, highly divisive characters, and they portray masculinity to an extreme state. Like, it's not, there's no temperance, there's no prudence. It's just a masculinity unleashed. So how do young men guard against that and pursue what is true, good, and beautiful?
Yeah, just to keep zoomed out for a little bit there on that topic, it's something that's become more and more apparent to me, especially I think the murder, this assassination of Charlie Kirk has been a big example of this too. And you've seen a lot of people kind of half jokingly say this, but I do think there's some severe truth to it, that it's been interesting seeing people who celebrate his death or say how terrible he was. Like, a lot of conservatives were coming out and they're like, you thought his opinions were bad.
Yes.
You should hear my opinions.
Milo.
And I mean, there's certainly negative and toxic ways to that, but I mean, there are several topics me and my wife used to debate where I'd be like, Charlie Kirk is too like big party Republican. Like he's too kind of like old Republican for me. Like I just don't think on certain topics and issues and things like that, like he takes a strong enough stance. Where it's like, that's very, like, people, like, they don't realize how true that is. And it gives people a lot more courage to step up and to be bold and to say what they really believe. I actually first discovered this when I was in Colorado, and I had joined a men's group, and a lot of them did Bible study at one of the local parishes. And a lot of the kids that go to that parish, they didn't have a Catholic school. And so a lot of those kids were raised going to public school, and then they went to public high school. And it was amazing hearing stories from these guys who are leading these Bible studies and knew these kids that either were telling stories of their own lives or of their friends who were being raised by two moms or had to deal with all these furries at their high school. They're dressing as cats and drinking out of bowls in the hallway. It's like, those young guys, and even some of the girls, like, they're not, we think that we're growing by forcing this on them, that they're becoming more tolerant. The opposite is true. And like, I had one of the guys who even compared it to kind of how like Nazi Germany started to be formed, where it was like you had this thing that was they had like this society where like problems and lawlessness and all these issues were kind of allowed to run rampant, and then you have this guy who's like, I'm gonna clean it all up and I'm gonna like restore us to what we were before. And it's like that I'm certainly not saying that President Trump is that, but I'm saying that he was basically anticipating that we're paving the way for something really strong and a huge swing in the opposite direction to come because of how crazy things have gotten. And so I think we underestimate that. I know I underestimated that before, where it's like a lot of these kids who are being raised by two of the same gendered parents, like, they're not growing up to be more LGBT friendly. They actually really don't like it. They actually really have a problem with it. And they're cutting out, you left my dad to marry a woman. Or you left my mom to become a woman or whatever. Like, most kids especially once they had a husband or a mother and father, they want to have a mother and father. They have a right to it. We believe as a church, that they have a right to it. And so when you're depriving somebody of their right, their natural right, that natural reason leads you to natural law. You don't need to be deep in the catechism to realize that kids need a mother and father because they need a mother and father to be created. And so it's a really interesting thing.
Do you think
see that societally?
Do you think it's because of the way God has designed the family that kids who grow up, say, with two moms would naturally feel that something is off, or is there like something else societally that maybe leads to them resenting their situation?
I do believe that. Yeah, I think that there's a natural desire for both the masculine and the feminine, especially
Hmm.
when you're being raised as a child. I think there's
Yeah.
specific things that a father gives to a son and to a daughter
Hmm.
that the mom can't do.
Yeah.
And we see this a lot, and you can see this in all the statistics really back this up. When you have especially young men, who I was this in my middle school years, which I attribute a lot of my wildness through high school to, having my middle school formative years without my dad really present, without any
Hmm.
strong male role models in my life. And you see the stats on children, especially men that are raised by a single mother. It's like
Hmm.
they're not great. They're the lowest rung of society typically. They
Yeah.
have the worst dropout rates. They have the worst crime statistics. They have the worst suicide and mental health. It's like across the board. It's really terrible. And
Hmm.
so I think science and just design really backs that up.
Hmm.
And then you add in the fact that they get on the internet, they can find whatever they want to find. And so they're
Yes.
going to find people who are saying, like, they're going to see both sides, especially if they're seeking it out or they have issues
Hmm.
with this. And they're going to see people on the right that are saying, like, you're depriving kids of their mother and father. And they see that and they're like, yes, like, this speaks to me. This is what I
Yeah.
believe. But I think to your point earlier about navigating masculinity, it is really hard, and I think it's a challenging thing. And again, I think it's something that the devil likes to do, where if he can't get you to be kind of this soft, embracing toxic masculinity, I'm going to be a feminist and just shame myself for the rest of my life, and
Yeah.
just continuously repeat the sin of Adam in the garden by being just utterly passive in everything that I am and do.
Hmm.
Then what's my other thing I can do? Well, let's make you an authoritarian. Let's make you a
Yeah.
tyrant, and just parade and dominate with your masculinity, not lead with
Hmm.
Christ-like love.
Yeah.
So if I can't get you to just be the lamb full time, then I want you to just
Hmm.
be the lion full time. And
Yeah.
again, Jesus Christ and who he was married those two and embodied those two perfectly. And so
Yeah.
there's times of self-sacrifice. There's also times of leadership and strength.
Yeah. Do you think it's better for society in general to, like, if we are to swing in either direction to the extremes, right? Either the lamb or the lion, is one better than the other?
Man, that's a good question. I think because we've been on the side of the lamb for so long, I think the lion is what we need to get us back. And so
Right.
I do think we need to err a little bit more on the side of, shooting for 60-40, 70-30,
Yeah.
being the lion as men and being
Hmm.
out there and being a little bit more bold,
Yeah.
leading our families well, and especially being the lion in face of the opposition.
Hmm.
And so, again, I don't think it's good to ever go 100-0.
Yeah.
But I think that we do need more line right now for sure. When you see
Yeah.
things like political assassinations, you see the things that they're going after children, going after the most vulnerable in our society, the way they're propagandizing and brainwashing people. Like, we do need to be a little bit more lion than lamb for sure. But I don't think that 100-0 of either really leads to a good society, leads to good
Yeah.
outcomes, because when you have the other side, it's just constant pursuit of power, it's constant pride, and they're not actually cultivating virtue. They're not actually
Hmm.
cultivating Christianity. You see this obviously, Andrew Tate, for example, is not a Christian.
Yeah.
And what he's promoting of he would be the same path that would kind of go full circle that we see from the feminist movement,
Hmm.
where it's like this it's still degeneracy.
Yeah.
He made his money and his fame off what they call webcam girls and basically online pornography.
Hmm.
And so when it kind of OnlyFans before OnlyFans was what it is today. And so
Yeah.
when you have somebody like that, that's basically an online pimp that's, claims like, oh, you don't know if I'm married or whatever. And he has these kids by different women, and he's not actually promoting any real traditional masculinity values, responsibility, virtue.
Hmm.
And it's just like about money and just kind of, my favorite description of Andrew Tate was somebody said that he's kind of like what every high school boy thinks like peak masculinity is.
Yeah.
And then you grow up and you mature and you realize, like, oh no, like having a minivan and like 5 or 6 kids being married to one woman, like this is what peak masculinity is. And like being
Definitely.
successful in a respectful career and you're being respected in your society, like that's what peak masculinity is.
Yeah.
But it before that, you think it's Lamborghinis and hot girls and being able to do whatever you want all the time and
Yeah.
barely raising your kids if you have any. And so I think it's important for us to realize like that will not get us back to, anything good, because
Yeah.
that's not what men were 100 years ago, at least not the good ones, not the ones who actually
Yeah.
built society, not the ones who are the founding fathers and the founding people of the West. Like, they were Christians, they were Catholics, they were people who were devoted to Christ, that wanted to put Christ at the center of their lives. that promoted traditional values, the family, leadership, responsibility, all those sorts of things. And so that, I think, would just get us back to this kind of same cycle where it's like, oh, this path of degeneracy is better than this path of degeneracy. And it's like, no, it's actually not. It's going to just get us to the same point of, it would just be that for women, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly what feminism did for men, of getting them to resent and reject it. And then eventually teaching women like, oh, this isn't actually what's best for me. That's exactly what Andrew Tate's masculinity would do for the women. Would hate it a lot sooner. And then men would just be like, oh, this actually isn't what's best for me.
Yeah.
Being like quasi-Muslim and hating women and just using them and just pursuing money and fame and power. It's actually not, it's not good.
So, but we have to acknowledge, though, that there is an undeniable lure for young men with the things that these influencers say, right? And something that I've noticed, at least in the online world, is that people have lost a mind for nuance. So what'll happen is they'll watch a video of Andrew Tate or some other influencer who will say things and it'll resonate and it'll like click because there's some degree of truth to what he says. And they'll be like, oh, this is great. I actually really like what he's saying. I'm going to follow this guy and like keep consuming his content. Instead of thinking, let me take this to its logical end. Like, let me take everything that he's saying to its logical end and see where that would lead me to be as a human being. People aren't practicing that. They're not thinking deeper than what is being shown to them. So knowing that as a church, what is the role that we should be playing to make sure that young men are being directed towards what is true, good, and beautiful, as opposed to being lured in by this false view of what masculinity really is?
Yeah, man. I think it's something that is something that I know a lot of Catholics especially wrestle with. I just was dived in the comment section of a Catholic yesterday who was saying, like, is it even worth it to post faith related things online? And are we just feeding into social media addiction and all these different things? And
yes, I saw that.
Yeah, did you? Yeah. So my response is always a resounding yes. I don't get this, the Benedict option when it comes to social media that we're all just going to retreat. Now, if you as an individual decide me posting on social media, I'm just doing it for clicks and I'm just trying to rage bait and I am, addicted to my phone, then yeah, you might discern as an individual that it's not right for you. Just like if you're an alcoholic and you shouldn't be going to the bars to try to evangelize people. Maybe, focus isn't for you. If you're an alcoholic at 21 years old, you probably don't need to be sent to Rutgers University. But I think that strategically or just generally speaking, should we be doing this? It's like, absolutely. We have to be present among these messages. I want some young man out there to see somebody like a Matt Fradd or a Dr. Arthur Brooks or some of these people instead of just seeing Andrew Tate. We can't just remove and let them just see Andrew. They're not. Well, we act like when we remove ourselves from the internet, we're also removing all of them, all the young, precious, impressionable minds. That if I stop doing this, then I'm sure they'll just get off their phones. And it's like, that's not the case. They're going to be on it regardless. So we're going to give them an opportunity to see something good or not. And so I think it's just the importance of, and it's what I try to do. I do it on a very small scale, but through my podcast, through posting, especially content with just my family, of just like what I'm doing, how happy and fulfilling it makes me to be a husband and father. I think we have to be constantly trying to promote that and just showing that this is the way. This is the right way. And I think especially targeting, not necessarily, not that we shouldn't target the youth. I think what's good that we have a lot of youth conferences, aim stuff at college kids and all those sorts of things. But I think when you get to that point of like your mid-20s, that is where I think for men, we can really start to try to hit them and say like, look, you have a decision to make at this point, whether you're going to go this kind of route of just money and not being married or whatever, and just pursuing pleasure and power and fame and all, what Dr. Arthur Brooks calls the four main idols, which I think he gets from Aquinas, of money, power, fame, and pleasure. Or are you going to actually embrace responsibility, traditional values, these things that you claim you believe? Like, are you actually going to do it? I think we just saw a beautiful example of that, especially in light of Charlie Kirk's life in his memorial service. You just had all these people talking about that. You want to be like Charlie Kirk. You admired him. You respected him. You could look at a Charlie Kirk and an Andrew Tate and pretty quickly decide, like, which one of those do I want to be? Yeah. And I think we have to continuously promote, especially as a church, which is why it's so sad that so many in the church, a lot of liberal Catholics were against it, painting him as terrible. Those are the type of people that push people into the hands of Andrew Tate. And so that's a sad thing. But when we can step up and say, like, no, look, like, this was good. Look at his
Mm-hmm.
legacy. Like, nobody's going to do this when Andrew Tate dies.
Yeah.
And he's just as, if not more, hated, and nobody's going to do this and memorialize him in this way. Maybe
Yeah.
his like 17 baby mamas will have, they'll have their funeral and whatever his kids were, and sure, people will be sad. They'll post about it or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
it is not going to be like this. Nick Fuentes'
Yeah.
legacy is not this.
Yeah.
And so when you actually embrace the true, the good, and the beautiful, and show them like this is the peak living,
Mm-hmm.
peak masculinity, I think we'll get to win a lot of people over to our side, because you see pretty quickly once you enter into the Andrew Tate lifestyle, especially for those who are the average Andrew Tates, which is what I was in high school, where you're not a millionaire driving a Lamborghini, flying around the world on private jets. When you're just like hooking up with random chicks at bars in Maryland, right?
Yeah.
Like it is not, or Georgia, like that is not fulfilling.
Yeah.
And so those are the people that I think are kind of like the fringe once they get into their 20s and they're not, in college, or they kind of actually get their brains fully developed at that 25 mark. I think it's very easy for us to kind of recruit from that batch of people.
Yeah.
Except for, you're going to have your basement dwellers that are still going to be Nick Fuentes, Groypers, and things like that. But I think your average person who's living out in the world, once they've hooked up for a while and they're like, man, this isn't it. I have conservative values. What's next? I think it's pretty easy to pull them into like Christianity is next, responsibility is next, actual masculinity is next.
I think that's where I get stuck a little bit though, because I'm kind of with Charlie on this idea of going onto university campuses and talking to people there, because it really is like a formative part of your life, right? Like you get exposed to new friends, you get exposed to like people coming from like all different states and all different cities and stuff, and they have their own ideologies and their own ideas. And yeah, and so I guess in my idealist worldview, it's try and save them before they fall into that trap of like sin, and then reforming them. It's like, let's try and keep you from falling into that in the first place. And yeah, I guess my question is really, and it's a tough battle, because like I went through that phase myself, and so knowing that, if you don't fall into sin, there might always be this sense of like, what if, like what if my life had taken a different direction? Like, how do you protect young people from that? Because like wanting to explore and this curiosity and stuff is a natural part of being human, but ultimately what we want to pursue is virtue.
Yes. I think you're definitely onto something there. And I think as a church, we have to hit every angle.
Yeah.
And I mean that even just generally as Christians. And that's what Charlie did, right? He emphasized and focused on college students. We have Focus here in the United States that does that. I know there's organizations like that in Canada and elsewhere that are really focused on college campuses. Then you have a lot of great ministries. And obviously we have Catholic education. We have Catholic education in colleges. It's just far more sparse in its orthodoxy, I would say.
Yeah.
But you have great Catholic grade schools and high schools that are trying to form people in that way. And then we have ministries that focus on that too. I personally speak to middle school, to high school, and to adults. I think that my personal sweet spot, which is probably where my bias comes in, is that kind of like 25-year-old man.
Gotcha.
A 25-year-old man who's either on the verge of that because he feels kind of that FOMO, or has experienced it and has gone out and realized that a lot of life is empty when you're on the side of pleasure, chasing money, all that kind of stuff, the world.
Yeah.
And so that's probably my bias for that. But I 100% agree with you that we got to be going after people at all stages. And it's better to prevent you from falling in the hole than have to get you out of the hole and tell you how we can avoid it again.
Yeah.
So I'm totally with you on that. And we have to have people that are kind of hitting every angle and every kind of stage of life, including the people that evangelize grandfathers, right? And get them back into mass and things like that.
100%.
So the whole range of life. But I think, for me, it's hard for me to give the best advice to people who haven't experienced the sinful life, because I did, and I did it at such a young age.
Yeah.
I am obviously hoping to cultivate that in my own children. I think my wife did a pretty good job of that. Yeah. And I think just as you can show people, like, especially we have an example of that in our home where dad lived a pretty wild lifestyle. Mom didn't. We both ended up together to live a pretty not wild lifestyle together, and we're extremely happy in it, is really the way that you show.
Right.
And so whether it's people who have kind of been on the straight and narrow for most of their life, and obviously everybody sins and falls short and deviates in their own ways, but if you can show people like, look, these are the happiest people in the world. Look at the many countless saints that we have. Again, looking at the legacy that St. Pier Giorgio Frassati or St. Carlo Acutis, the way that they leave this legacy behind of all these people who revere them, and now they're in heaven forever with Jesus Christ. It's that hopefully gives people a lot of courage, but then that's where I think testimonies like mine come in and are really powerful too, to where I get to talk at places like Catholic Family Land in Ohio, where you have a lot of these homeschooled large Catholic families that are really faithful, and they're 11, 12-year-olds are really faithful, 13-year-olds. And I get to come talk to them and say, hey, I lived that life that's promoted out there in the world by rappers, by athletes, by the Andrew Tates of the world. It left me really unfulfilled. It was really hard on me. It was really difficult. I hurt a lot of people. It made me feel really bad about myself. And just speaking to them in plain language to say, like, I did it. I tried it. I was raised in it. And I now am not living that way. I'm now living the way that the church calls us to live to the best of my ability. And I'm so much more fulfilled. I'm so much more joyful. I'm so much more happy and proud of who I am, and would never want to go back.
Yeah.
And so I think like those kinds of things really help people to see. You can see it too. Just when you're out in the world, it's gotten so extreme that it makes it a lot easier to be like, okay, I think there was this kind of like sweet spot transition where it was like lukewarmness and being kind of the world, and like the 80s, then like the 60s through like the 2000s. It was like kind of cool, and they seemed happy. The hippies were just like smoking so much weed. It's like, whatever, like we're fine. And then you get to this point where like the 2000s, it shifts. And you just see this like hard spike, especially with social media. It was almost good for us in this way, where it just like made everything so much worse that it's like, it's not even, I think, very tempting if you know a way out of living this depressed, constantly anxious lifestyle. It's like, why would you not? You can't go out there into the world and see somebody who's just looking absolutely depressed and disheveled and not excellent in any way, shape, or form and be like, oh, I want to be like that, instead of my well put together, respectable parents, who are living their life with faith and have peace and joy. I'm going to go be like these joyless people.
Yeah.
I think a very small percentage of people are going to fall away during this time period, which is really good for us, because I think it was really hard to keep people in the 60s and 70s when degeneracy looked really fun.
Yeah, that's true. I guess swinging things a little bit, and going back to the original premise, which was this growing divide between men and women in terms of like political leaning and stuff, and we know how important that stuff is to unity as well, right? So the union between man and woman, marriage, dating. It's just, I feel like it's going to be much harder for men and women to come together on a lot of things. What are your thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's definitely something that we need to be concerned with. And ultimately, it always comes back to the same answer in my mind, which is just we need to evangelize better, and we need to evangelize more. Now, what's interesting about that, though, is the other thing that you hear very, very commonly, at least here in the U.S., I don't know what it's like in Canada, dating world there, if it's any different. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap between our cultures, but we always hear that there's more women than men.
Yeah.
When it comes to the church, at least, that it's like all these women, we can't find any good men. Yes. And so there's this interesting balance there where I think like out in the world, like the secular world, you do have this greater divide where it's like, okay, the men are conservative, the women are not. And how are they going to get together and meet and date and have families and live together? It's a difficult thing to think about. How are they going to navigate that? In the church, I don't really see this as being a huge issue for us, because of the fact that I think we have more young women who are actively engaged in their faith than you do young men. Most young men who are faithful and serious about their faith and not, on the hot mess express tend to be married by the time they're 30 years old.
Yeah.
Because there's just a lot of options. That's kind of how I felt once I like really started to take my faith seriously, get into the church world. I was like, wow, there's like a lot of great young women here that I could date, or directions I could go. And so, it's an interesting thing that I think like in the world that divide is really big, and we have to be concerned about that. But in the church, I actually almost feel like the divide is still lopsided for women, where there's more young women than there are young men actively engaged in the faith, which is why we have to do a better job of getting some of those guys who share our values that aren't going to church and aren't active in their faith to be so.
Why do you think, so if there are more women who are, single and looking, why is it that men aren't as engaged in the church then? Especially if they are tending to be a little bit more conservative leaning. Like it would just seem like a natural transition that, okay, then I go to church and, I become involved in parish life and things like that.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more of it. I think as a lot of the church returns to more tradition and more kind of a masculine practice of religion. But I think that part of it is for Catholics, I think this is true in the US that the Catholic Church here, especially our leaders, especially our bishops, are behind the curve, even compared to the government and like kind of the cultural shift in the United States of America.
Right.
You see this most abundantly clearly with recent actions, and yeah, I'm sorry to keep talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination, but it's a great example of this, of how many bishops actually said anything about it.
Right.
The USCCB never issued a statement. They were quick to say, as soon as George Floyd died, we're doing all kinds of things, big letters about it, talking about it, kneeling, all the stuff. But when something like Charlie Kirk, again, this beautiful moment of saying like, look at this man's life. Was he perfect? No, none of you are either. But he loved his family. He loved God. He wanted to share the message of what he thought was good, right, out there in the world. And he did it courageously. This gives young men something to follow and to aim for. Even if you have issues with some of his policies and beliefs, you can still look at this as somebody that, generally speaking, would be good if young men emulated him. We can't, most of them won't do anything. I was looking at my own archbishop here, and he's posting about Catholic school teachers like 2 days after it happened, and love Catholic school teachers. I work with Catholic school teachers. Is that the time? Is that what's best? Is that what we need right now? No, but then you're going to get upset when we don't give to the Archbishop's annual appeal, and you're upset that nobody reads the stuff that the USCCB puts out, but when we want something from you, you're silent.
Yeah.
And so we're just kind of, we force ourselves into irrelevancy when we do stuff like that.
Right.
When we have these kind of soft, overly effeminate songs and liturgies that are just totally run by women. I always say, like, when I was growing up, you would typically see a priest, and then it would be all women cantors, women Eucharistic ministers, women lectors, female altar servers. And so it's like, okay, either I'm a priest or I'm a woman, or I don't belong here.
Right.
Is how it seemed.
Interesting.
And so I think when we do stuff like that, that's a huge reason as to why we don't have a lot of young men in the church. Now, as we return to tradition, a lot of these young priests are incredible, and they're like
100%.
all about it. They're locked in. Like, we're going to see that start to change. And we're appealing more and more to young men who are saying, this kind of evangelical Christianity, that's also not for me. It's also very effeminate to need to be entertained and have light shows and concerts and talk about the soft, nice Jesus all the time. Like, that's also not it. There's some great, Protestant churches out there who are speaking hard truths and encouraging people to really live more authentic Christianity. But a lot of them aren't. And so you're seeing a rejection of that too, that it's like, this also isn't the solution. And they're embracing more like Orthodox Christianity and Catholicism. But I think the Orthodox do a lot better job of us of just saying, like, we're sticking to what we believe. And like, we're promoting what we believe, and we're going to be a little bit stronger for the most part. They also have their own issues. But I think as Catholics, as the church starts to do that and embrace this moment and try to like be leaders, which I think a lot of us lay Catholics are doing, and select few bishops and some great priests out there are doing, we're going to see the tide shift, and we're actually going to draw more men in. But I always tell people, I'm like, the women out there, I'm like, if you want more men in the church and you want them to be here, like, you got to sit down sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And I know that it's hard for you to do that because women are so good about seeing a need and stepping up to fill that need. But it's like, priests, don't come out and say, oh, we need more lectors. Invite specific men to be lectors.
Yes.
This is one of the huge differences we always talk about with inviting men and women, is if you just like open it up to the parish, women will come.
Yeah.
But you have to like personally invite men a lot of times, whether it's to a men's conference, men's retreat, whatever. And it's like, so we just have to do that. It's not complicated. It's not hard. But the pastors have to be real men that the men respect, and then they have to challenge the men to actually step up and lead and be involved. And then when you do that, when a man does stumble into the parish, he sees, oh, look at this young 32-year-old great-looking guy in his green sports jacket who's lecturing in mass this weekend. You know, like that's what I hope, in small ways that my example does at my parish, and that I can, move people in that direction by being active.
That's exactly my thinking as well. I lecture too, and if for me it's just a matter of like, whenever I go to church and attend mass, it's either someone that is past 60, or it's a woman, and they are generally the lectors. It's very rare that especially young single men like I'll almost never see them be a lector unless they're like a seminarian, or wanting
Right.
to go into the seminary.
Yeah.
Those are the only people that I'll see get involved. And I think people underestimate how much of a difference that actually makes is when you go into a church and you see who's involved in various ministries, that sends a message. And then,
Yes.
people act based on the impression that they get from that as well. Yeah, on the topic of marriage though, like I was envisioning this being like a challenging thing that we have to talk through, but it really seems like the best advice probably is, men, if you're looking for conservative women to marry, just go to church.
That's right. I really think that. I think that's it's a huge part of it, man. Because there's a lot of good women out there, and you have to reject the Andrew Tate is telling you that there's no good women out there and that they all stink. It's kind of like Pearl, right? Pearly Things, I think is her like Twitter handle, and she's one of those that was kind of like in her early days. She kind of reminded me of The Godfather. What's his name? Kevin Samuels. Have you ever watched? Do you know Kevin Samuels?
I've heard of him. Yeah,
He's passed away, but he used to, man, especially as a black dude, like he would just like torch a lot of a lot of black women on his show, and he would basically bring them on and just show that a lot of times women have these ridiculous standards, and they think too highly of themselves. They want a man, they don't take care of themselves physically, financially, anything. They got children with different men, and they want to find a man that's making $200K a year, $250,000 a year, that's going to take care of them and let them stay home. All these, it's just, he would just show the hypocrisy and just how there's a lot of issues within the black community that's not just all women, but I had felt for a long time like black women are driving a lot of this, and just the way that they're kind of tearing down a lot of what used to be so good about the black community here in the U.S. And he just called it out. And Pearl kind of seemed like she was doing a lot of similar things there, and I think just really went off the deep end and just went to this like full Andrew Tate, like hating women and thinking that like men should be able to cheat on women and it doesn't matter and all these kinds of things. But you have to first reject that, and you have to reject this concept and this belief that there's no good women out there, that there's no good and this is something that is just rampant, man. And this, we see this all the time online. We were just talking about it earlier with my fights this week on LinkedIn. There's just rampant this idea that you shouldn't have hope.
Yeah.
And whatever it is. And people that tell people, oh, you'll never be able to own a home. You can't afford to have children. Even if you're making $200,000 a year, you and your spouse, you can't afford to have children. And it's a sign of the wealthy, and it's just for the privileged and all these things. There's no good men out there. There's no good women out there.
Yeah.
It's like, you can't believe that. If you believe that God is calling you to something, whether it's to have children, which if you're married, he is calling you to that, or at least to be open to life. If you're single and you believe he's calling you to marriage, if you are married and you have children, you believe he's calling one of the spouses or the mother to stay home, then you have to believe that it's possible. Like God doesn't give you impossible desires, impossible commands to fulfill. And so maybe it's that he's not calling you to those things. But if he is calling you to that, then why would you think that it's impossible? Why would you believe that that's the God that we serve, that he's going to give you this impossible task? The great thing about finding a spouse is you only need one.
Yeah.
And there's billions of people in the world.
100%. Honestly, though, like sometimes looking around and seeing the struggles of young men and even the struggles of young women, like I won't discount that, especially when, they are really leaning on their faith and they're struggling to find a partner and stuff. I can't help but feel so relieved that I'm married and I don't have to be dating right now. Like, it's such a relief,
Yeah, I'm very grateful for it as well. I see both sides of that. One, I'm glad that I just don't have to deal with the texting and, I text my wife like all day long, but I mean, just the kind of like getting to know you stages constantly. Like, I'm really glad I don't have to do the kind of like small talk. That's the thing that I'm most excited about being done with. But I think there was, for me, I always tried to like tamper that with that. I don't have this like last train out of Nam or last plane out of Nam, experience, because I was like, I thought it was fun at the time. I remember the time when I was starting to date Emily, there was like several great Catholic women in my life at the time that I was considering pursuing, and decided to pursue Emily. But I just think I also kind of go to some of these events, especially when I was in Denver, we'll go to these like young adult events, especially for guys, where I'm just like, there's just several really beautiful fun, awesome young Catholic women here.
Yeah.
You know, and so like I sometimes don't get it. I do understand it more for the women because there's less, great looking, normal, fun Catholic dudes here. But I also see that they exist, and like I also have still have some friends who are younger and single and things like that. I don't have as many like older single friends, which is what gets difficult sometimes with like some of my single Catholic female friends. It's like, okay, well, when we're 32, like I don't know a ton of, young, 32-year-old single guys. I was like one of the last of my friends to get married at 28. I think I was when I got married. And so it's like that part is hard, but like in the 25 range, whatever, like I see it a lot. And one of the reasons why I love Kevin Samuels, I had tempted with the idea of becoming the Catholic Kevin Samuels is to not totally blame men and let women off the hook here. It's just that I think that a lot of women do fall into that same trap. I think that feminism has infected the minds of a lot of young Catholic women, and they find themselves similar to what I talked about and described earlier with Black women, is having these unrealistic standards and these incredibly high standards. And I've just seen it where either they have incredibly high standards or they have incredibly low standards.
Yes.
Either they wasted some of their prime years, which in the Catholic world is, 21 to 25. It's not necessarily like we think of prime years in the secular world of like 25 to 30, 32 for women, because that's when most people are settling down. I think for a lot of Catholic women, it's kind of 22 to 26, 27. And they're wasting that with dating men who aren't even remotely interested in getting married. Or I have, we have one, I know somebody who is constantly afraid of like truly masculine men and like dated this really effeminate man for a long period of time and was off the market for a while because of that. And then dealing with the breakup and getting back together and all this stuff and kind of these prime years in that 25 to 30 range. And then it's like, well, he was never going to be ready to be a good husband and father anyways. Like he was very clearly a mess. And we wasted some pretty important time there with this guy. Like, you don't have forever. And I think that you have to be decisive, but you also can't be like, oh, well, you're not making enough money to provide for me right now. And
right.
He's like, dude, I'm 24, or like I had one guy who I know that his girlfriend just broke up with him because he's an entrepreneur and building his business and he's doing well. He's successful and working really, really hard. But it's like, oh, I don't think I don't think I want this and this kind of fluctuating income and things. And it's like, this guy's super driven. He's super faithful. He's super fit. He's, pursuing excellence in his life. And it's like, oh, this is, this isn't for me. And it's like, all right, maybe it's not. But if you're single in 10 years, I just know, in my life, in my experience too, when I was dating, I have several ex-girlfriends who have gone off to be married and happy. And there was certain young Catholic women that I dated or that rejected me when they were younger that now are 32, 35 and single and 30 years old and single. And because they didn't want to give up, little things or they didn't want to, make certain sacrifices or whatever it might be. And so you see that sometimes and it's just sad, man. I just see it and I'm like, man, to think about how often we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot, right? With our own standards and biases and things like that.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think there's also like a degree of, and we'll wrap up here, but I think there's also a degree of people feeling like they need to marry someone who is, on the same level as them faith-wise, it's like, oh, I'm a ministry leader in this and that. And this person is, they're Catholic, but they just go to church on Sundays. They don't go to daily mass. Well, it's like, I don't know why you're setting these standards. Like, some people are shooting themselves in the foot by doing just that.
Yeah. 100%. Yes.
Yeah.
I think that again, to what I said earlier, going back to the leftist liberal, my advice to men, I say the same thing about dating in general when it comes to the faith life of the person is even if I when I was dating was not anti-dating Protestants, but I wanted them to have at least openness to Catholicism. I'm not going to date a Protestant who hates Catholicism, who thinks Catholics are damned and idol worshipers and all these things. Like if somebody's like, yeah, I don't know much about it. I was raised Protestant and I'm like super into my faith. Like I'll go on a date with you. Like I'll explore this and try to share my faith and see what'll happen. And I think we have this exactly like you're describing where it's like, well, if you're not, another woman that I knew years ago who was approaching her 30s or was 30 and had this great Catholic guy. He was a hard worker, would have been a good provider, and he was Catholic into his faith, but couldn't have enough deep theological, spiritual conversations.
Okay.
And it's like, dude, like these are the kinds of things, man, that is like, okay, nobody's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
You know, and you see certain people, and we try to be as open as possible, Emily and I,
Yeah.
with like where we disagreed, where we had to come and, you know, meet in the middle and compromise on certain things, because it's easy to look at us, or, you know, you and your family, and just be like, oh, they just must have been a perfect match. And they were
Yeah.
just like perfectly aligned on everything and agreed with everything. And it's like, no, man, like we had our own things. And there's times where Emily is, you know, much deeper and more practicing in her spiritual life, and
Yeah.
times where I'm leading and more practicing and holding down the spiritual life for our family.
Yeah.
And I try to obviously lead in that and be the best example I can in that. But there's times where she's crushed it, you know, where I'm going to more daily masses because I'm out in the world and going to work and things, and she's praying the rosary every day. Now, I haven't prayed the rosary in a month, right?
Yeah.
And you can kind of look at these trade-offs in our spiritual life. She studied theology in college. She knows more theology than I do. But I'm still, you know, praying with our sons and blessing, you know, our kids and doing those kinds of things. So it's like there's balances in different aspects of life, and things where I lead, things where she leads, and you know, kind of there's at least strongest. You don't have to find a spouse that is better than you in every single way, or at your level in every single way. I just think, people are just making their life a lot harder than it needs to be.
Definitely. At the end of the day, marriage is two broken people coming together and trying to orient themselves towards God, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's good. Yeah, it's a lot to navigate, but I just encourage people out there. I say, if I can have one last fundamental message, is just be hopeful. And if you feel like, again, God is calling you to something, God is not the type of God that's just going to call you to something or give you serious desires and an inclination this is his will for your life, and not give you a path to get there. It may look different than you want. It may require sacrifice, may require some compromise, may require you to let go or to work harder, or for you to grow and to change and challenge yourself. But he's not going to just not make it possible. And so don't believe the world, the lies and negativity that are just constantly pounding you and saying, like, this is impossible for you. This isn't realistic. This isn't going to happen. There's no good men. There's no way to have kids. There's no way to afford this. It's all lies. And the devil just is using people to try to discourage you and get you to fall into despair.
That's an awesome closing message. I love that. As always, we'll end with prayer. Nathan, I want to give you the opportunity. Do you want to lead the prayer, or should I?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. In the name of the Father, Son,
Father,
Holy
Son,
Spirit.
and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this conversation, for the opportunity for us to come together. I thank you for these guys and the great work that they're doing here with this podcast and their ministry, most importantly, in their example and their family and their life. And so I ask you, Lord, to send your Holy Spirit down to just inspire us, help us to become better men, help us to become better, help women out there to become more fulfilled in who you created them to be. And we just pray that you'll just raise up a new generation of leaders and people who are going to inspire and lead other people to excellence, to living lives fully devoted and dedicated to you, lives filled with hope, with joy, with peace. And that by doing so, by being on fire for our faith, by having this zeal, that we will appeal to as many young people as possible, and that we'll start to fill churches, that churches are overflowing, that seminaries are overflowing, Catholic schools and education is overflowing. And we just have this return to orthodoxy and to this balance of lion and lamb that is so needed in our time today. So we pray for our countries. We pray for the world at large. We pray for our church to be strong in this time. We ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.
That was an amazing prayer, better than one I could have done. So, I'm not opposed to the idea of you tuning into every episode that we record just to come on and do the prayer. So
you
let me know if you're
man.
open to that.
Yeah, just shoot me the invite. You can hit me up in the last 5 minutes.
That sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. This has been another episode of the Coffee, Commerce, and Catechesis podcast. God bless you all.